another massive area where, again, it will be weekly. I will speak to landlords who have, under private rent, rented a property to a tenant directly without an agent. And again, it's probably an example where landlords are being far too nice and probably not treating it as a business. So we'll get the tenant came along, they seemed really nice, they had this problem, this is why they needed this property, but they seemed lovely, they seemed so nice, and the tenancy is granted. Now, there will be occasions when that works out, and that's great, but sadly we do see occasions where that tenancy doesn't work, and often it's costly for the landlord, either because there's damage or because there's non-payment of rent, or sadly sometimes because there's both. So referencing, absolute must. For managed clients with us, it's an integral part of the pre-tenancy work. But even if you didn't, for example, want to use an agent like AMRP or any other agent, there are options for landlords for referencing. So there's companies like Open Rent who are online. They used to be £29. I'm maybe a little out of date on that, but it used to be £29 where they had a sort of reference check service. But I think I would just encourage landlords to think carefully about referencing. Treat it as a business. Don't be too nice. I think don't be driven by emotion. The tenant who presents themselves nicely and in need may not be the best tenant choice. It feels bad to say don't be driven by emotion, but at the end of the day, this is a business, and you can't entirely be driven by emotion. As an agent, with that bit of distance, I think it is quite easy for us to be driven by fact. So when a tenant reference is returned, we can speak to our landlord clients and work on fact and evidence that the reference has brought back. So yes, perhaps be a little less nice. Strange sort of advice. But the reasons referencing is so important, as I say, avoiding damage or non-payment of rent, but importantly to check affordability, because most good referencing services will have in there an affordability check. So it's great a tenant coming to us and saying they can afford this £500, £600, £700 rent, but genuinely can they? And that is something a good reference check will test and double check. A good reference check will be speaking to former landlords and checking what that landlord's experience was of the tenant. And often it will confirm the source of income. So is the tenant in employment? Is it stable employment? Is it a full employment contract, or are they on a more fluctuating contract, for example? Many tenant reference checks will do credit checks, to check the tenant's back financial history. So there's a number of things there, but I think in general it's just to absolutely encourage landlords to think about not granting a tenancy without having an evidence-based reference check process, because again, and I think it is done out of niceness, and I think it's done with very good intention, but again, something we see happen far too often is tenancies that are granted without robust tenant referencing and probably done on emotion, which is lovely, and I know we're trying to help people as well, but it is a business, and really I'd encourage landlords to make the tenant decision based on evidence from tenant reference and not from sort of being emotion-led. And generally, the point at the bottom, don't be rushed, don't panic. I always say no tenant is better than the wrong tenant or a bad tenant. I appreciate as a landlord, I have 30 properties, and my team will probably confirm that, when one of my properties is empty, I count every day. I know how much it costs me every single day to have that property empty, and one of our measures in the office is that. So yes, we work as quickly as we possibly can, but I'm always mindful it is better to have an empty property than a property that is stuck with a bad tenant. So try not to rush, try not to panic. Build a reference-based evidence process before you make a decision to grant a tenancy would be our advice. And as I've said, there is help with that. AMRP is happy to help. There are obviously agents in every area who would potentially help, and there are online services. So absolutely, just a mistake we see all the time. Dreadfully difficult to unpick once you have the wrong tenant. So try and prevent, not cure, if that makes sense. So damp and mould, we touched on earlier when we did the